Baku race is over, as is the weekend, and it's going to take some time to digest it all, so we better get started. Qualifying took place on Friday, and I doubt many people would have thought Charles Leclerc would put it on pole position, ahead of Max Verstappen, but that's exactly what he did, just pipping the Red Bull driver. His teammate Carlos Sainz struggled for pace, and as it happens, he'd struggled for pace all weekend. The other big shock was George Russell missing out on Q3 by 0.04 of a second, with Lewis Hamilton only just squeezing through in 10th. Lewis did eventually qualify in 5th though, behind the 2 Red Bulls and the 2 Ferraris. Both Aston Martins though had issues with their DRS not opening. Also, a huge improvement for McLaren with Norris in 6th and Piastri in 10th. The sprint shootout took place on Saturday, and this set the grid for the sprint race later that day. Logan Sargent sadly hit the wall and wouldn't actually be able to race in the sprint because there just wasn't enough time to fix the damage. The shootout was a little bit weird really, with cars queued at the end of the pit lane for long periods of time trying to get track position. Charles Leclerc would take pole position again though, despite putting it in the wall on his final lap and making it back to the pits with a broken front wing. Well, the wing was really hanging off. Russell though had a much better session, putting it in 4th. The sprint race itself was ultimately pretty boring and straightforward, other than the incident with George Russell and Max Verstappen. Russell had a good start and was alongside Verstappen going into turn 1 and then into turn 2. He had a little lockup though, and he understeered into the side of Max. At the time, I honestly thought it was a nothing issue. Max was obviously very angry on the radio, but I thought not much of it. It was only after the race did we see just how bad the damage was. It would have absolutely been costing him performance. He lost that position to Russell at the time, but got it back after a safety car restart for an incident involving Yuki Tsunoda, which we will talk about in a minute. Max was able to close in on Charles Leclerc though, who dropped to 2nd place after being unable to stop a charging Sergio Perez, who would ultimately go on to win the sprint. After the race, Max was furious when he spoke to George Russell, and it all got a little bit heated with some choice words being exchanged. I just want to go back to the Yuki Tsunoda incident for a minute because this really irritated me. Yuki Tsunoda had an incident around, I think it was turn 15. He's grazed the wall, which is fair enough, it happens. His tyre has actually come off the rim and it's rolling down the road, which is obviously very dangerous. And they brought out a virtual safety car, and I'm thinking, okay, that's enough to deal with this. We can't just have a tyre rolling down the road, so that's fine. He then slowly works his way back to the pit lane, also fine. He wants to probably just carry on, even though in the sprint race there's probably not much point. He thinks, okay. They look at the car, the chief engineer or mechanic gives the thumbs up, they change the wheels, send him back out. By the time he gets to the end of the pit lane, it's pretty obvious that the car has a suspension issue. The car is doing something called crabbing. That's when one side of the car, the suspension's failed, and it's sort of, pulling to one side, and you have to really turn the steering wheel like 90 degrees just to get it to go in a straight line. As he's leaving the pits, that's what's happening. So you think, logically, he's just going to pull over. There's an escape road or an exit road right ahead of him at turn 2. No, doesn't do that. Okay, he's going to go around turn 2 then, and at turn 3, he's going to take that exit road and stop the car in front of the marshals. Nope, doesn't do that either. He goes around the entire lap, crawling like that with broken suspension, instead of pulling it over at an escape road. And I don't for the life of me know why he did it. I don't know why he did it. Yes, he wants to get the cars back to the mechanics, but A, it's not safe. He shouldn't be doing it. And B, they brought out a full safety car ultimately because they had to. And it just really annoyed me that he went the entire lap driving like that. It really, really bugged me. I would love to know why he did it, but that was arguably the most exciting part of the sprint race. Like I say, the sprint wasn't that exciting once everything settled down. Hamilton lost out to Fernando Alonso when he was trying to get past Carlos Sainz into turn 1. He got squeezed a little bit by Sainz. It was fair though, but he had to back out slightly, and that allowed Alonso to get past him on the inside. And the order never changed after that. Hamilton really struggling for pace. Then we have the race itself, and honestly, it wasn't a very interesting race. Leclerc got away well, but he was a sitting duck, and Verstappen got through very early on and instantly pulled out DRS. It then wasn't long before Perez got through, and that's how you expected it to finish. Then fairly early on into the race, Hamilton pitted from 5th. He was under a lot of pressure from Fernando Alonso, and he put on the hard tyres. But the lap after, Nick de Vries hit the wall and his car was stranded around turn 6. And despite this, Red Bull decided to pit Max Verstappen. Right afterwards, the safety car was deployed, and because of that, Charles Leclerc and most importantly Perez jumped Max because they were able to pit under the safety car the lap after. Lewis Hamilton, of course, who also pitted, lost out big time, dropping behind both Aston Martins, his teammate George Russell, and Ocon and Hulk that were going long on hard tyres. He got past Hulk and Ocon really easily, and then he was able to get past Russell even before the DRS was turned on. He wasn't really able to close up on Sainz though. He got into DRS, but he was never really able to get close enough to pass. It was actually a good recovery from Lewis based on the position he was at after the safety car. In the front, Max got past Charles Leclerc easily, but he was never really able to close up on Perez, as their match times were pretty even across the board. It was actually a really good result from Perez, who just seems to be a street circuit master. Then there was the incident at the end of the race, which was unbelievably dangerous. Ocon and Hulkenberg both started from the pit lane, having changed things on their car. They started on the hard tyres. Then when everyone else pitted, they moved up the positions. They were running 9th and 10th for a long part of the race. And they were actually frustrating the cars behind because they couldn't get past. And their goal was to stay out in the hope there was going to be another safety car and they would benefit from it. But there wasn't. Then a couple of laps before the end, Nico Hulkenberg finally pitted. But Ocon didn't pit until the last lap. The problem was, there were photographers and media all over the pit lane, obviously not realising there was still a car to come in and pit. Do you remember Albon in Australia? I think it was last year. Very similar thing. This was even worse though. They were all over the track at the entrance to the pit lane. And as you come into the pit lane in Baku, it's actually kind of a blind corner for the drivers. Luckily, no one was hurt and they all just scrambled when they saw the car. But that should never happen. Never should that happen. First of all, nobody should be allowed into the pit lane until the race is actually finished. But secondly, someone needed to know, hold on, there's a car that's going to come and pit. The Alpine mechanics were in the pit lane ready for him, and yet all of the press were there across the track. Incredibly dangerous. Red Bull mechanics were also already on the pit wall, up the fence, which also you're not allowed to do. It's actually been stated now in the regulations you're not allowed to climb the fence, but they did so anyway. I doubt anything's going to come of that. Someone, though, needs to take responsibility for what happened. Ultimately, it wasn't a very exciting race. It wasn't the best weekend. I don't really like the sprint format. I'm not a massive fan of the new format either. I gave it a chance, but I don't think it's for me. I prefer the normal weekend format. That's just me. Either way, it wasn't an exciting weekend, and here's hoping Miami is going to be better. So, I'll see you next weekend.